Hello, welcome back to Sweet MTG, and welcome to Instant Deck Techs. In this series, we go over everything you need to build a certain commander. We'll go over the strategies and the types of cards needed you need to get the deck working. Any cards we mention will be down in the description below. In this video, we're going to be talking about Elminster. It is 3 white-blue for a Planeswalker with starting loyalty 5. It has a static ability that whenever you scry, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of cards looked at while scrying this way. It has +2, draw a card, then scry 2, and a -3, exile the top card of your library, create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature tokens with flying equal to that card's mana value. It also importantly has Elminster can be your commander. So, firstly, let's go over what the deck is trying to do and how it wins. Elminster leads a Spells Matters deck with a Scry subtheme. We'll use Elminster's +2 effect and other Scry effects to help navigate through our deck, looking for our answers and our win conditions. We'll use Elminster's static ability to reduce the cost of our instants and sorceries. In the early game, this will help us with some card draw, and in the mid game, it'll help out with our interaction, and then in the late game, it'll set up some game-ending spells. The way to think about that static ability is that it's a little bit like a bat tree. We'll be playing spells that have a scry amount equal to or greater than their mana cost. This means with Elminster out, we get that mana reduction on the next instance and sorcery that we cast, kind of making the next spell free. Because the reduction doesn't affect coloured pips, there will always be a limit to how many spells in a turn we can cast, but this should still let us chain multiple spells together in a turn. To win the game, we'll be playing some token makers, either on instants and sorceries that directly make tokens, or on cards that make tokens when we play instants and sorceries. That will also tie in nicely with the -3 of Elminster, which can also make us a board of flying threats when we scry something massive to the top. First up is the Scry Matters section. These are all cards that scry for at least their mana cost, so you can bank mana for your next spell. First up is Mystic Speculation. For a blue and paying the buyback cost of 2, this lets us scry 3. So with Elminster, our next instant and sorcery will cost 3 less. This does include paying for the buyback cost if you want to cast it again. When we get to our Spells Matters section, you'll see just how good casting a spell repeatedly for a blue mana will be. Next we have cards like Foresee, Tamiyo's Epiphany, Graven Lore, and Ugin's Insight. These let us scry and then also draw some cards. What's powerful about these is the ability to chain multiple of them together. If we have Elminster out, you can cast Foresee, you'll scry 4 and draw 2 cards. If you then were to cast Tamiyo's Epiphany would only cost 1 blue, and then it'll also reduce the cost of your next instant sorcery by 4 as well. Next up we have some creatures that scry when either they come in or attack. These still help us ramp into our next instant and sorcery, also while helping us smooth out our draws, and can also protect our life total in the early game. We also have some repeatable bits of scry, with Crystal Ball and Netherese Puzzle-Ward. In this deck, they are effectively mana rocks for instants and sorceries. And then one last card that helps with our scrying is Oath of Teferi. With this out, we can activate the +2 ability of Elminster twice in a turn. Or in the late game, we could -3 it twice in a turn and create a truly powerful board state. Next up is our Spells Matters section. These will either help us cast our instants and sorceries, or will reward us when we do so. First up is cards that make our spells even cheaper to cast. This will add to the cost reduction from Elminster, and will mean we'll be able to cast some huge impactful spells in no time. Then we have cards that make us tokens whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. With all the chaining of spells that we'll be doing in this deck, having 1 or 2 of these in play will make us a commanding board state super quickly, that we can either use to defend Elminster, or push them into the red zone when it's time for us to win the game. Then we also get some nice bits of recursion for our spells, with Gale Waterdeep Prodigy and Lear Disciple of the Drowned. These both let us cast instants and sorceries again from the graveyard, meaning we can keep casting those big scry spells again and again, to keep triggering our token makers. Next up we have some more card draw spells. I'd personally want to run these on top of the Scry Matters cards that we've already gone through, as these are basically cards that replace themselves while triggering all the token makers that we've already gone over. We still want cards that scry here, so we can keep making our next spells cheaper, but in this section these can also be cheaper to cast with less impactful scry numbers. They'll give us something to do in the early game, and will help us draw towards our more powerful game-winning cards. A card that goes great with all the cheap spells and cantrips is Archmage Emeritus, which with his Magecraft ability draws us a card whenever we cast an instant or sorcery, which, as the bulk of the deck is going to be instants and sorceries, will add up to a lot of card draw. And then one last cool card draw spell to mention is Curiosity Crafter. This lets us draw a card whenever a token we control deals combat damage to a player. This deck is going to be making a lot of tokens, and because a lot of the tokens we're making have flying, we should be able to draw a large number of cards with this. The added ability to have no maximum hand size is also fantastic, as it lets us keep all the cards that we've drawn. Moving over to our ramp, as we have a lot of colourless mana cost reduction already going, we're going to want to prioritise things that tap for blue or white mana. We'll start off with some rocks. These are exactly what we're after. They'll ramp us ahead nice and early so we can get Elminster out, then give us additional blue and white mana so we can start chaining spells together. There's also cards like Wayfarer's Bauble and Loyal Warhound, which can get lands out of the deck so our ramp isn't destroyed if anyone destroys all of the artifacts. A 3 mana rock that I really like in this deck is Midnight Clock. Again, it ramps us ahead, but can help refill our hand if somehow we ever run out of cards. 2 last mana rocks that I would consider are Thought Vessel and Decanter of Endless Water, as importantly, these also give us an unlimited hand size. Moving over to our interaction, we have some of the most efficient bits out there. We have some really cheap removal in the form of cards like Swords to Plowshares and Pongify. Reality Shift is another great exile effect, and then Generous Gift hits anything for some fantastic flexibility. We also have plenty of board wipes in these colours as well, so you can really tailor this to suit your budget. One card of note would be Hour of Reckoning, which destroys all non-token creatures. You can also look to run a little bit of counter magic on top of this, to put a stop to some of the more broken things our opponents are doing, and then also help to protect our best laid plans. Moving over to some win cons, we have some pretty fun ways of winning the game. First up is with some really big, expensive spells. With all the cost reduction effects that we'll have, these will be really easy for us to cast. And what's better is that if we scry them to the top, we can use Elminster's -3 ability to make an army of 1/1 flyers, equal to that card's mana value. Of these, I think my favourites are Stormherd and Devout Invocation. That's because they tie in nicely with everything the deck is trying to do, while also being huge swingy effects that seem like a load of fun. Another card I think could be very solid is Soulblade Djinn, which effectively gives all of our creatures prowess, meaning not only do we go wide with our token makers, we can also go tall with the Djinn for even more damage. Talking of even more damage, we can also run Psychosis Caller to weaponize all the card draw that the deck will be brimming with. This can just sit there and start pinging out all of our opponents. And then we have one mechanic that we had to mention at some point, and that's Storm. With all the cost reduction and cantrippy effects, we should be able to cast a load of spells in a turn. Combine that with Mind's Desire, and we should have a ton of fun flipping spells and creatures out of our deck. There is also one last little package that's worth mentioning. As Elminster makes flyers, and a fair amount of the token makers, and even some of the scry creatures, are also flyers, you can look to run some cards that pump these up, with cards like Empyrean Eagle, Kanji Skywarden, Thunderclap Wyvern, and Inaz the Gale Force. These can turn even the smallest flyer into a lethal threat, but worth mentioning if you're going this way, I would be quite ruthless and primarily only run flying creatures, or token makers that make flying creatures in the deck. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, as with 2 colours we can run a decent amount here to help the deck out. I wouldn't run too many colourless lands, but Reliquary Tower seems like an absolute slam dunk. Scavenger Ground is also just good at answering any graveyard decks at the table, and is basically free to run. We then also have Isolated Watchtower, which is some additional ramp for when we have some spare mana to burn. For some ones that tap for blue, we have some extra scrying with Castle Vantress, and then some nice recursion for a spell with Mystic Sanctuary. For white, we have Iganjo, Seat of the Empire, for some extra removal, and then there's New Benalia for some scry on a land. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We've recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.